Yes, Republicans must think they own the White House. I say this as someone who has watched them before and after the election. From the heights of George F. Will to the depths of Glenn Beck, they were predicting not just victory, but a glorious one in this election. What made them think so? The polls were tight, but favoring President Obama. What North Star was guiding the GOP, convincing them that the White House would be back in their hands this January, back where their hankerings convinced it belonged. Well, there was a darker side to this deep sense of executive entitlement, this sense they had the same assumed access to the White House as they did to the corporate dining room. It's more than a bit frightening. Maybe you have. I have heard at least one person of the right state their pained belief or relief that at least the election didn't end up in a situation where Obama won the electoral vote, but Romney got the popular vote. Yes, I agree. That would have been bad. It would have denied the Democrat the kind of clear mandate that any president can use. But the implication from the right wing seemed to be that had the Republican candidate won the popular vote and yet been denied the office, there would be trouble of some undefined type. What the heck did that mean? Yes, we've had to put up with this ridiculous secession petitions out there, the Texas version having been signed by over 100,000 people since Election Day. But could the right have gone further had it been armed with a popular vote victory? There does seem to be a difference in the two parties here. When Al Gore lost in the Electoral College 12 years ago, he ignored his 600,000 vote victory in the popular vote. He just learned to live with the irony. Republicans have carefully forgotten this bit of history, but I have real doubts that those on the angry, demanding right would have been so quietly obedient to constitutional law. There's something out there on the right now that is still uneasy with this defeat, searching desperately for an explanation of how the conservative caterpillar they had right there in their hands became the liberal butterfly, now happily fluttering and, yes, defiantly free of them. And they don't like it one bit. I'm joined right now by New Yorker's Rick Hertzberg and the Huffington Post's Howard Fineman. Rick, you've written a beautiful column in the New Yorker this week, and I just wonder about this sense they have of almost royal ruling class identity with the White House. What do you make of it and their attitude before and after the election? They really weren't going to lose, and they haven't, really, in some strange way, because they got the House.
Yeah, well, this attitude has built up over time, over the years. They didn't really think Bill Clinton was legitimate because Ross Perot, they thought, cost him the election. They thought that Obama's original election was a freak on account of Bush being such a terrible president. And they just were not equipped to deal with this defeat. And this was a real defeat because it was a defeat across the board for the Republican Party. Yes, they kept the House, but guess who got more votes? Democratic candidates for the House got more votes than Republican candidates for the House. And it may not make any difference constitutionally, but it makes a moral difference.
Yeah, and they like to hang it on. I think there's more to it. Their sense of entitlement here. Shortly after the Romney-Ryan ticket lost 26 states and won just over 47% of the vote. In other words, did worse than John Kerry in 2004. Paul Ryan denied that the president earned a mandate in an interview with ABC's Jonathan Karl. Let's listen.
The president wins 330-some electoral votes, every battleground state with the exception of North Carolina. Does Barack Obama now have a mandate?
I don't think so, because they also reelected the House Republicans. So whether people intend it or not, we've got divided government.
So you don't think there's a mandate here?
So I don't, because then they would have put Nancy Pelosi in charge of the House of Representatives. See, I think these ideas that we talked about, I think they're popular ideas.
Anyway, it turns out Paul Ryan's wrong. When you look at the raw vote, voters cast about 400,000 votes more for House Democrats than for Republicans. And with votes still being counted, as Rick said, that's expected to grow to a 1 million vote majority. My question is, why are they getting into this whole thing? When we have elections, I worked for Tip O'Neill, as everybody knows back then. Tip never came out, the speaker never said, oh, yeah, but we've got a 40-seat majority in the House, or we're going to have an even bigger one after Reagan gets reelected. The presidential election is where the mandate goes.
Well, first, I agree with Rick that this began with Bill Clinton, the sense of no legitimacy to a Democratic president. That's where it started. That's where it's continuing. I think also that the way politics is divided today makes it almost required that people deny the legitimacy of the other side. And beyond that, I think the Republicans kind of view themselves as a kind of ruling class that are entitled, by virtue of their success, by the virtue of money, by the power of money, to buy anything, that they should be able to continue to buy these elections.
Now, I think, Rick, what do you make of this sort of North Star they go by, that they believe that this is a center-right country? I mean, I don't know whether it has to believe that the old founding fathers' notion that somehow white men of property rule the country, and that's their notion of equality, because somehow in their minds they think, oh, it must be a Republican country. All my friends are, the guys I work with, the women I know, they're all Republicans. This country must be Republican. I can't believe these results.
Well, there may be something to it in the sense that when you, depending on how you ask polling questions, you can get the answer you want. You can get an answer that tells you that it's a center-right country. You can get an answer that tells you it's a center-left country. But on this business of what would have happened if Obama had lost the popular vote and still won the White House, I think you would have had a very different reaction from Obama. And I think that in the year 2000, if Al Gore had been able, if the shoe had been on the other foot and Al Gore had become president while Bush had gotten the popular vote, he would have responded differently. He would have acknowledged that, and he would have wanted to do something about it. That has to change at some point, and it's going to have to change probably after both sides' oxes are gored.
You mean you think we're going to get a change in our Constitution at some point to make it a popular vote?
You don't need it to be the Constitution. There's the National Popular Vote Initiative that would do it through the states. You can do it without changing the Constitution and see how you like it.
Yeah, it's interesting. The states could just simply decide to go by the popular vote of the country. Anyway, the chorus of Republicans predicting a Romney win was loud and offered intellectual heft. Michael Barone predicted that Romney would win handily. Peggy Noonan in the Wall Street Journal said all the signs pointed to a Romney win. And on Fox News, Dick Morris, not exactly an intellectual, predicted a Romney landslide. Listen to this.
In Florida, the Times says Obama's going to win by 1, but their sample has 7 points more Democrats than Republicans. So that poll is off by a factor of 8. So instead of Obama winning by 1, Romney would win Florida by 7. In Virginia, they have Obama winning by 2. But they have 8 points more Democrats than Republicans, and historically, there's 1 point more Republican than Democrat. That's off by a factor of 9. Romney wins Virginia by 7.
So you are standing by your prediction of a Romney landslide?
Absolutely. Romney will win this election by 5 to 10 points in the popular vote and will carry more than 300 electoral votes.
Okay, we're talking about a real phenomenon here. I mean, you got people like Neil Newhouse, not just right-wing crazy people, who actually were saying this election was in the bag. It was going to be a glorious victory, overwhelming victory. People like George Will were saying, Peggy Noonan, smart people, all saying overwhelming. What was their worldview that convinced them of that? And I still think, because I think a lot of that leads to this defiance now of, well, we still have the House. That's somehow a counter mandate. There's something strange going on here, and it's going to matter as we get into these cliff talks, these debt cliffs.
Yeah, well, it's because I don't think the Republicans want to admit to themselves what the real problems are here. There are two, as I see it. One is the cultural side. The country keeps changing on issues such as abortion and other things.
And we're going to get to that tonight.
We're becoming more liberal on those matters. We just are.
And same sex.
And they're stuck with those issues, those traditional issues. They don't know how to get away from it. They're going to have to. The other thing is money. The other thing is that people like Chris Ruddy, who I think is a very responsible, interesting conservative, runs Newsmax, says that the reason why Mitt Romney lost is because people didn't like him. But what Chris doesn't understand is that the reason they didn't like Mitt Romney is that he seemed only to care about money. He seemed only to care about profit, and that he didn't have any communal sense to him that could be applied to government. The Republicans don't see that a pure obsession with free market economics comes across to everybody else in the country who isn't them as too cold-blooded, as too cold-hearted. And the fact that with almost 8% unemployment, with the people thinking that the country is going in the wrong direction, that they still voted for Barack Obama makes it an even bigger rejection of the Republicans and conservatism than they are willing to admit to themselves.
Rick, just going back, this love of the founding fathers has gotten to a point of not reverence for their courage in standing up to the British Empire and putting their lives on the line and being quite enlightened in so many ways given who they were. But this notion that the free men of this country are the white men of property. And that is really what Romney ran on, white men of property. He didn't say it. intellectually. I don't think he ever put it in any words. But look at who he was rallying to as you know, as Howard just pointed out, that seemed to be the rallying cry. Men of property, join together, defend the wagon train against the onslaught of the others. That seemed to be what they were doing in this campaign.
Well, let's be fair to the Founding Fathers. For their time, they were pretty darn progressive. And the idea that, for example, that they drew up the Constitution as a mandate for small government, just the exact reverse of the truth. We had small government under the Articles of Confederation. The framers went for big government. And yeah, they gave small government arguments when they wrote the Federalist Papers, just like you always try to appeal to the arguments of the other side. But they just don't understand what the framers were up to, and they worship them rather than trying to imitate them.
Well, the other thing is
they weren't thinking of Sally Hemings' vote. I'm sure that
the other thing,
that would be a guess.
Quickly, Chris, the other thing is that when you listen to the explanations that the Republicans and conservatives give for why they lost, they would say, well, the black community and the Hispanic community voted overwhelmingly for the president.
The urban vote.
The urban vote. And as if those votes don't count as much as everybody else's vote. And as if that's some kind of explanation, explanation for the weird phenomenon of the fact that the Republicans did win. There was this extraterrestrial force out there of African Americans and Hispanics.
Yeah.
Well, duh, that's the country.
The last person to try that, I hate to say that, and this has no bearing on the Republican Party, and these references are always dangerous, but I'll take it anyway. The last guy to refer to the black auxiliary was Hitler. Anyway, thank you, Rick Hertzberg, and thank you. During the 36 Olympics, we had Jesse Owens and a couple other guys winning the Olympics, and they were saying, well, they had their auxiliary out there. Anyway, thank you. Coming up.